Here we have a row of cones of different kinds of yarn. We're going to not talk about the 8-8 right away. We're going to start with the other one. We're going to start with the 3-2 and go all the way down to the 20s 2. Talk about what those numbers mean. In the yarn industry, they have a device that looks like a needle gauge. When you don't know what size knitting needle you have, there's a device that has holes in it, and you can put your needle through to discover what size needle it is. They have something similar to measure the diameter of the yarn. And in this case, the smaller number would be the thickest, and then we go all the way down to the 20, and that would be the thinnest yarn that I have here in a row. What does the bottom number mean? The bottom number means how many yarns are plied together. So with 3-2, 3 is a size, and 2 means how many yarns there are. But then we have what I might call an outlier. We have one that's called 8-8. Actually, that means the size of the yarn is 8. However, there are 8 threads in that. So when they're combined together, it's going to be thicker than some of the others, and it's called 8-8 yarn. Let's take a look at this yarn. The yarn on the cone is called 3-2, and when I tried to find another yarn, like a knitting or crocheting yarn that was close, DK came the closest. And what I did was I calculated how many yards per pound and compared them. They came out close, very close. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at why do I have 10 written down there? What does that mean? Well, first of all, this on the edge here, it might be kind of hard to see. It says 10, which actually means if I put this ruler there and I would count all the slots, there would be 10 in 1 inch. The same thing with this rigid heddle. We have a slot and a hole, and if I would count every slot and every hole, there would be 10 in 1 inch. When I looked at some charts, this was one of the reads they suggested. Now, what am I talking about, charts? Well, this is one of them that you could find on the internet. This one is on the site of Shat Spindle Company. And if you notice that what they have here, I'm going to lay this down flat. Hopefully I can zoom in a little bit on it. And if you notice, they have some numbers and they have words on there, which be like, wonder what that's all about. Well, right now, we're going to take a look at 3-2. It's at the bottom. Actually, I'm going to move it up so we can see it. We can see the 3-2 here. And what they're telling me, there's about 1,260 yards per pound. And the DK comes close to 1,200. That's why I use that. And then at the top, it says tabby, which is plain weave. And they say 10 to 12. Well, that's suggesting that I use a reed or I set the yarn at 10 to 12 ends per inch. There's another way of calculating and using reeds if you don't have the exact size reed for weaving with the metal heddles here. But when you're doing rigid heddle, you actually need one that matches to the 10 or the 12. In this case, I could use 10 to do tabby, but if I go over here, it has 15, and that's if I was going to do a twill. Most of the time in rigid heddle loom, unless you're going to use 2 rigid heddles, you're going to probably stick with even numbers like this, 10 or 12. So right now I have a 10. However, I could, if I wanted to, let's switch this up a little bit. We could move these out of here, and we are going to slide in another reed. But you also have a choice of using a 12-dent reed. It'll make it a little bit tighter, but again, they're suggesting using either DK or 3-2 if you're going to use 12 ends per inch. It'll be a little firmer cloth that you're weaving, and I think it'll look very nice. So that's one suggestion if you're using 3-2 or DK weight yarn. Let's say you have 5-2 yarn or fingering yarn. In front of us, I have 12 dent. One of them is a rigid heddle, and again, if I would put the ruler next to it, it would be a slot and a dent in every inch. And if I put a ruler next to the metal reed, it would be 12 slots in every inch. Now here's the chart. If you notice on the chart though, it basically for 5-2, they suggest 15 to 18. You could possibly use the 12 dent. However, the weave structure might not be as balanced. What might happen is that if you have this in the warp, the 5-2 or the fingering, and you start to weave with it, it may cover up the warp and not look balanced. You'd have to beat a little softer. So what they're actually suggesting, and what I would recommend is, and you can get, for rigid heddle looms, you can get a 15 dent reed, and let's switch this over to 15. So now we have a 15 dent reed, which is more what they're recommending, this chart. And again, this is the Schatt Spindle Company. If you pull up other charts from other manufacturers or other companies, or even some well-known weavers, you're going to see charts that are very similar, suggesting how many ends per inch. That's what that means. EPI is ends per inch. So that's what I would suggest using if you're going to use some yarn that's fingering or 5-2 weight yarn. Most of the time when you do get a rigid heddle loom, it happens to come with an 8 dent reed. That would mean, again, slot, hole. And a lot of times looms, when you purchase them, you might get an 8 dent reed. Well, I have 2 samples here, the old Peaches and Cream, and I have some 8/8 yarn that I've purchased from another company. When you calculate those, you work it up and you get maybe 800 or 900 ends per inch. Now, I don't have it on the chart I've been showing you, but they are going to suggest, obviously, I think you could tell here, well, here's an 840. They're saying 12. I'm not sure about how that works. That seems to be out of whack here in my case. If I would go down a little bit farther here and say it's a thicker yarn, it would be a smaller number, and I would say then it would be 8 ends per inch, and that would work out very nicely. And again, with the Peaches and Cream or whatever other cotton that you might have some heavy yarn, you could also do that at 12 ends per inch, or excuse me, 10 ends per inch or 8 ends per inch. Again, just remember, it's going to be looser if you do 10 ends per inch. It'll be a tighter weave if you do 8 ends per inch. If you're still watching and I haven't lost your attention yet, we are now looking at what we call a reed substitution chart. Now this one is from Jane Stafford's website. Again, you can type in reed substitution chart and find lots of them out there. I actually prefer one that has lines across it. We don't have the lines here. So we're going to kind of look at this in another direction. Let's say you have a 10 dent reed. That's all you have. Right up here is the 10 for the 10 dent reed. And you decide, all right, with 10 dents, I'd like to use that particular reed, but I want to do 8 ends per inch. Well, I go down here and I don't have an 8. I only have a 7.5. So what you do, you'd have to use that one because that's what we have. I'm going to go on the top. We're going to look underneath because of the shadow here. If I could do that as close as I can, this 0 means you skip one of the slots in your metal reed, and then it'd be 1, 1, 1, and then you go back, skip one. Maybe you have an 8 dent reed. Okay, let's say you have an 8 dent reed, and I'm going to go down here, and I want to set it at 12 ends per inch. Well, how do I do that if my reed, again, this is only the metal one, I'm going to go down here till it says 12, and again, we're looking underneath, below. So what does this mean? I put 1 thread in one slot, 2 in the next, and I keep repeating 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. This is what you can do when you have only a few reeds. And as I showed before, if you don't have the exact number, you need to find something as close to the number that you want and use that number, and hopefully you'll get the same result. Again, this is if you have a metal reed, not the rigid heddle looms reeds, because it doesn't work the same way.